Hello and welcome to a Passenger Seat podcast, a podcast designed for your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all usually recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. But as you can see behind me, I am in a bit of a different setup today. I am sat in the absolutely fabulous Arrow Series Vogue of Nigel Hughes, and it is sat here on 15,000 miles. It's an absolutely gorgeous example of one of my favourite Roots cars. They have a huge special association for me because I actually came home from hospital when I was born in a Arrow Series Vogue that goes by AGO, which is the first three letters of its registration plate. And it was a silver one that had actually previously been owned by Nigel Hughes. Nigel has known my family for a very long time. He knows my family longer than I've known my family. And we're going to have a little chat with him today about his experiences of the Singer Owners Club, his experiences of owning fantastic vehicles like this, but also owning pre-war cars and how kind of those two exist together in his life. He's a fantastic asset to the club, and we've had a brilliant weekend that has been organised by him and his wife Emma here up in Cheshire. So I'm really grateful that on the Monday morning before we all head off, he's had the time to come and have a little chat with me and also try out the back seat of his Singer Vogue for the first time. So I hope you enjoy, and I'll be back at the end to wrap things up. Okay, so I'm now joined by Nigel, and you've been in the club a little bit longer than my parents, right?
Yep. I joined the club my uncle joined the club for me in 1976.
And was that because you had a Vogue like this?
No, I suppose you could say, a bit of a wayward teenager.
Yeah.
And an amazing uncle who used to look after me better than my dad. Basically could see I was on the slippery slope.
Yeah.
He had a Singer Vogue, which for some reason I had a real hankering for. I loved that car, and identical to this one we're sat in today. And Uncle Tom, bless his heart, he not only bought me my first year's membership of the club, even though I didn't have a driving licence, but he gave me his Singer Vogue with the request that I don't go and buy a motorbike, I don't go and get my ears pierced, I don't mix with the wrong crowd, and I actually concentrate on the old car.
Yeah.
And I did, much to the amusement of all my mates, because it wasn't exactly the trendiest car to drive around in the late 70s, but I loved it, and it was amazing. And you know yourself, Beck, that these cars have a real character. There aren't many modern cars that have beautiful wood panelling, amazing deep recessed chrome instruments, and people do look at you when you drive by on the roads today. It doesn't have to be a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. A classic car still attracts a heck of a lot of interest.
And these Arrow Series Vogues are even more unusual, because I think when most people think of a Singer Vogue, they think of the kind of earlier series, the Audax series shape, whereas this is kind of my preferred shape of a Singer Vogue.
And it is mine, in all honesty. The earlier cars are very attractive. They have a real American flair and styling, and they're very elegant from their period. But I think the Arrows have a very, very crisp, defining line. The designers of the car obviously had a real subtle eye for detail. And typical to Roots products, there were lots and lots of little extras embodied into the design, lots of little features like little eyebrows on the main beam and indicators, which can dim them overnight if they're very bright and glaring. So yeah, I prefer the Arrow. I think the Arrow is an amazing car. It's a drastically underestimated car, ranging from the basic Hillman Minx right up to the highly luxurious Humber Scepter, and the real sporting Rapiers, and the very elegant sporting Alpine.
Yeah.
It's a great range of cars, and it's a credit to the stylists and the engineers from the 60s who developed this car from 1963. And it was developed in parallel to a very ambitious project to create a car called the Swallow, which would have been a rear-engined, a bigger version of the Imp. But because of some of the issues with the Imp initially, Roots decided to go for another conventional design, but a much more updated car. And of course, the Ford Cortina Mark II came out just fractionally ahead of the Hunter, but the two of them brought in this new, much squarer line of styling, which was very, very common in the late 1960s. And I actually think that the Hunter had a better shape.
Yeah.
You look at the profile of the car, it's not quite as chunky as the Mark II Cortina.
Yeah, because there's a car that we both know called AGO, which my listeners will know, and it's kind of disappeared off of the club's knowledge. And your thoughts are that it's possibly owned by someone who's after that kind of Cortina look, but without the kind of price that's attached to a Cortina, because they don't kind of have the Ford tax attached to them, but have that kind of really early 70s styling that's quite cool.
And of course, they are drastically underrated cars. Their values are much lower than the Cortinas, and as a car compared to the Cortina, it actually probably represents far better value for money. And so whoever has got AGO, I think they're hanging on to an incredibly amazing car that Becca wants back.
Or at least to see. I think that would be fantastic. So I think a lot of people know you in the club for the Vogues, but you've also been involved with the pre-war stuff, because you used to own what is my dad's 1935 four-seater Le Mans. You owned it when he used it for his wedding. Tell us a bit about Nellie.
Right, well, Nellie was a very special car. Nellie came along at a time in my life when I was ready to build and restore one more car, and I'd always wanted a longtail. The longtails are a very, very elegant development of the Singer 9 sports car from the mid-30s. They have this very graceful, long, sweeping tail, hence their nickname, the Longtails. They're actually the only four-seater that can truly be called a Singer LeMans, because they are badged as the Singer LeMans four-seater. And so the car was probably one of those cars that from the 1930s represented the pinnacle, really, of the styling of the Singers. When I got Nellie, she was in a terrible state. I bought her from a really lovely lady, Jo Hilliam, in Long Sutton, and it was the start of a long and ambitious restoration, which, as a younger person, I wasn't necessarily technically as competent as other people might have been, so it took a bit longer. But I did rely on people like Ian Blackburn, who was a great character in the Singer Car Club at that time, very, very clever engineer. And I relied on other people like Becca's father, who was a real enthusiast himself. And people in these car clubs, it's amazing, it never ceases to amaze me just how helpful people are. And it doesn't matter what the problem is, what the query is, what the technical issue is, there's always someone that will spare you the time and help you either overcome the issue or try and get it sorted out by someone who can. Also, the restoration of Nellie, she was called Nellie by Jo Hilliam's mother. Jo Hilliam's mother had two cars. She had a coupe, which she called Miss Scarlet. It was bright red, which she used in the winter months, and she had Nellie, named after Nellie Melba, the opera singer, which she used in the summer months.
And they were like swapped colours, weren't they? Because the saloon was red with white wings, and Nellie at the time was white with red wings. Yeah. So they were like a matching pair at the time. Yeah,
and she was a great character, Mrs. Hilliam. Mrs. Hilliam's mother was called Marjorie Seed. She was a great character. She was a real theatre goer of the period, quite an adventurous lady for the early 60s, and was often seen whizzing around the countryside of the fens in these cars. She also had two peacocks, one of which, called Charlie, very often escaped and would be found in the vicar's gardens, so she would go off in Nellie to rescue Charlie, and so very often Charlie would be seen being chauffeur driven back to their home in Long Sutton in the back of Nellie, which must have been quite a sight in itself. But eventually Nellie was restored, and as Beck just mentioned, her dad and mum were getting married, and another very good friend of ours, and that's another part of the Treston collection, he brought his Singer Junior over, I drove Nellie over, and we had an amazing day in Stamford. And I suppose to a degree we're only custodians of cars for as long as we are interested in them, or until we find another project that we want to take on, and of course then that car has to be moved on. And I was really pleased and flattered in a way that Barry and Carolyn decided that they would like Nellie, so I knew it went to a really good home. It was with mixed feelings that I saw them drive away in her, but I knew as Nellie was moving on to a new chapter in her life, which has been probably a far more exciting chapter than the chapter it had with me, I then moved on to the next project, which actually, quite interestingly, was AGO, this Singer Vogue that I managed to buy from London. I had it for a few years, then Barry and Caroline bought that, and so the story goes on.
another person that was probably quite helpful in all of your restorations. You were quite fortunate to live ever so close to my Uncle Ernie, but you knew him as Ernie, and he was the gentleman that had restored Dad's other car, Emma, and he was a big part of helping you with your projects and
Ernie
stuff.
Stoop was, I think he was everyone's uncle. He was such a kindly man. He was an amazing man. He had a number of health issues, but nothing ever deterred him. He was indefatigable in his work and his enthusiasm and his interest. And when you were at a point when you were almost going to give up, Ernie had the way to just persuade you, don't give up, let's just have a look at it. And we went back through different issues, and before you realised it, the job was sorted. Ernie always used to make me smile because he was an electrician by trade, but he was colourblind.
Story.
And so how could you have a colourblind electrician? And of course, Bex can tell stories that her dad's mentioned about how Ernie managed to rewire cars.
Dad used to go around and put all the tape wires with numbers on for him, and then Ernie would have had the code as to, right, well, that's 1, 2. But he was an electrician in the war, and then they found out that he was colourblind. The electricians.
That sounds typical Ernie Stoop.
Yeah.
He was a remarkable man, and sadly we lose people like Ernie. But Ernie is one of those people you never lose remembrance of. And even at these events this weekend, we had Ernie's family join us, and it was just so nice that his car was here, his daughter was here, and obviously the Trestons, who were very close to their family, they were all here. So the names live on and their stories, and I think while they live on in our hearts and minds, we never lose them. They're with us all the time.
What's some of your favourite memories of... We'll start with the Vogue. What's some of your favourite memories of being out in the Vogue?
Right. My favourite... Well, probably my best memories of Singer Vogues are my Uncle Tom. He was a great guy. He kind of showed me right from wrong. I wasn't a very lucky person. My father wasn't the best of fathers. Uncle Tom was absolutely amazing. And he kind of guided me. He was my mentor, and he set me on the right path for life. And I always have visions. Uncle Tom was a very successful man. He worked for IBM down in Portsmouth, and he drove a Singer Vogue. Then when he passed the Vogue on to me, he bought a Humber Sceptre, continuing this Roots line. Before the Singer Vogue, he'd had a Hillman Minx. His loyalty to Roots almost was a bequeath to me. And it was inevitable that I would sort of follow his part of the family's line. I've got lots of memories of singers, and the Vogues. I suppose probably my most vivid memory is the first time I went out in Uncle Tom's Singer Vogue with him. At that time we were living up in Blackpool, and it was a really bright sunny day, and he and my Auntie Joyce had come up from Hornchurch where they were living, and we went along the promenade in Blackpool on this beautiful sunny day with the windows open and all this beautiful woodwork sparkling and shining in the sunlight. At that time my dad had a very utilitarian Morris Oxford which felt like an old tank, but somehow this very elegant Singer Vogue sweeping along the promenade at Blackpool just seemed like the most amazing car you could ever wish to be in. And that, from that very early, and I was probably 6 or 7 at that time, never imagined that car would eventually be my own. And then through the years there are other occasions. I remember I had a silver Singer Vogue before AGO, where I went to a show at the Crewe Heritage Railway Works, and 3 cars were picked out to be lined up alongside the Princess Elizabeth steam locomotive. And Princess Elizabeth was in partial steam that day, and the cars were all lined up, and it was at the point they were starting to take some photographs. They just released some steam through the cylinders on the Princess Elizabeth, and all these cars were enveloped in this cloud of white steam, and as it gradually dissipated, the cameras started clicking, and there were these amazing pictures of these cars with this misty horizon and then the Princess Elizabeth behind them.
Oh my God.
That was quite a magical experience. And of course Princess Elizabeth was there for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee on one of the bridges in London over the Thames at the time of the river pageant. And there's lots of other memories, and of course some of the other memories aren't just about the cars but about the people who built the cars.
Absolutely.
More recent times, at one of the NEC Classic Car Shows, I met an amazing guy called Douglas Field, who had been the Singer Field sales rep for Roots Group, representing Singer in the 1960s, and one of his favourite cars were these Singer Vogues, and so it started a lasting friendship. We've got obviously Bex and Stephanie and Barry and Caroline. It almost as if through the cars I've built up this big network of friends and family. And it's an amazing time to have people around you that not only love the cars that you drive, but actually also drive them themselves.
Yeah. And what's some of your best memories with the pre-war stuff?
The pre-war stuff are amazing. There's a real difference in driving an enclosed saloon car to getting in an open-top sports car. First of all, they drive in a very different way to a modern-day car. The fundamentals are still the same, and I wouldn't want to put anyone off ever driving one. If you ever get the chance to drive one, drive it, because you'll never forget well, you won't forget the experience. It's quite a novel thing to drive. They're a little bit more difficult on the brakes. You've got to be much more, you've got to read the road further ahead, and you've got to be braking sooner. But in terms of, and I'm just watching a Singer Junior moving around in the car park here as I'm chatting, you know, they are amazing cars. They have a character all of their own. Probably one of my best memories of being in a pre-war car, a very good friend of ours, John Parker from the Singer Owners Club, has an amazing 2-litre open-top Tourer. And at one of the rallies down in East Anglia, my wife and I were taken on a trip in John's car back home after a dinner one evening, and it was a beautiful moonlit night. It was typical sort of narrator's story, and I was sat in the back, and this car with huge great big headlights illuminating everything in front of us in a burst of light was driving down these lanes almost effortlessly, and the big 2-litre Singer engines are very quiet. And it just was such an atmospheric experience. That is a lasting experience that will always abide with me. I always remember picking up Nellie from Long Sutton as a pile of junk way back. At that time I was working for Vauxhall Motors, and a Vauxhall dealer very kindly loaned me an Astra van and a trailer, and I trundled all the way over to Long Sutton to pick her up. It was emotional because Jo Hilliam, who was selling her mum's car, it was the last of the 2 cars, she was basically parting company with something that had been a massive part of her mum's life, and obviously she was extremely attached to her mum, who she'd lost. And driving that car, Nellie, back home across the country, putting her in the garage and then starting the restoration. That was quite a moving experience, taking her home. I suppose also my latest pre-war car, the Singer Sports, which I met a guy, an amazing painter and car engineer and restorer, Jim Kenniston, many years, probably 45 years ago I met Jim with the car when he had first restored it. It was absolutely, truly beautiful. He made an absolute work of art of the car. And he drove it all over Europe, he drove it all over the United Kingdom. He was a real passionate Singer owner. Along with a number of others. They would go off on continental touring holidays in the cars. He made a lot of modifications to it that made it a more drivable car. But driving that car for the first time in Llangollen a few years ago, on the day that I was basically making up my mind, do I want to buy this car? It was a really nice experience to actually be in a position where I had the money in the bank to buy something, rather than having to go and borrow money to buy it or keep it going.
Or buy something that was kind of like a project and then have to like do
this
all
one
the
was
work
all ready.
and stuff.
The only sort of proviso in buying that car, my wife wanted a red one, and of course it was white. And so I had to approach Jim very carefully and say, look, you know, you've really very kindly agreed to let me buy this car. How would you feel if I changed the colour to red? And immediately his face lit up and he said, you don't know how happy I would be, because originally it was red. And he produced some old photographs from an envelope of when he'd first got it, and sure enough the car was red. And he said also, if I saw it as a white car, it would always be my car.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you change the colour, it's your car.
Yeah.
And so we had, again, typical of this type of sector, the classic car movement is an amazing sector. I met a remarkable car painter, Colin Ravenscroft, who works from not far from me in Cheshire, and he took on the project of painting the car for me. He made an absolute amazing job of it. I reassembled it all, put it all back together, and of course the red Singer 9 reappeared just around about Christmas of 2017, and it was a great sensation on Christmas Day to actually drive that car around to my wife's family on Christmas morning to give them their presents, and for everyone to see the new red sports car.
And it's it's a little bit unusual, isn't it? So it has its own little special category on the field
It does.
at National Weekend because it's got a non-standard engine, but that proved quite useful at National Day yesterday in terms of providing that kind of stepping stone for some of the young members and women drivers social club that had come along, because they got that feeling of being out in an open top pre-war car when they were driving it, but it was a running gear setup that they were used to because it's an A series in there.
It is. I like a lot of people in our movement. Old cars need young people, and so there's been a big shift in recent years for people to encourage young people to drive their cars, to get involved with them. So yesterday at Singer National Day, it was a real opportunity to give a group of young people who'd come from the Young Morris Minor group and from Becca's Women Drivers Social Club the opportunity, if they wanted, to drive the car. Now, the Singer 9 is an easy car to drive if you've driven a Singer 9, but to jump straight into it as a young teenager or early 20-year-old, it might be a bit daunting. And as Becca rightly pointed out, in the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of the enthusiasts at that time were taking these cars away into Europe on long 2,500 mile journeys, and they didn't necessarily want to damage or wear out the Singer engines. So they started to look at ways where they could still use the car but preserve the engine, and they started to play around fitting different types of engines. A popular one was the BMC A-Series engine from a Morris Minor. But then as they progressed and became more and more clever at dovetailing the engines into the chassis, they found that one of the best engines, not only for performance but for reliability, was the 1275 Sprite engine, matched to the gearbox of the Sprite, which is what's fitted in my car. And as Becca rightly pointed out yesterday, young people were basically able to jump out of a Morris Minor and get into that Singer 9 sports car, 90 years of age, and drive it with relative ease. The only things that they needed to be mindful of were the brakes weren't quite as sharp as theirs would have been in their car, and the steering was a bit heavier. And they had great fun, and I hope they've gone away from the event not only with the experience of being able to say, I drove a vintage Singer yesterday, but equally, in a few years' time, I think I might like to get involved in a project to save one of those, because without those young people's interest and enthusiasm, we ain't going to have anyone coming into our sector taking on these cars. And as I mentioned earlier on, we are only custodians of the cars for so long before someone else gets the opportunity to drive and own them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, yesterday's event was a busy day for you. In fact, it had been a busy weekend, so we were really grateful that you had the time to lend the cars out. You've been doing national weekends for ages, and I know that as a family, we know that if Nigel's doing a national weekend, it's a good one and we have to be there. What is it that you think makes a good classic car weekend?
I think the venue is a key part of it. We were very, very lucky in Cheshire to be able to use Cranage Hall, and the team at Cranage Hall were 100% committed to making sure we had a great weekend. The other thing, of course, is the accessibility of a venue. People need to be able to get there. Sometimes venues can be quite difficult to get to, so having the right venue but also in the right location is quite important. And I think also a lot of planning and organisation in advance of the event, so everything fits in. Because at the end of the day, if it's your national weekend, then it's your showcase event of the year. It's the shop window of the organisation. It's a way of bringing all the members together so they have a good time. But it's actually also a case of benchmarking the love that we have for these cars, and the fellowship of being part of a club that really does care about each other, and we all want to have a good time together. So merging all that into the melting pot and then creating a national day, once you've got all the basics in place, it pretty much runs on rails on its own. So many people came to help out as we were beginning to set up the weekend. Yes, okay, my wife and I have had the planning to do in the last 12 months, but people were putting up tents, people were getting tables sorted out, people were marshalling cars into the relevant classes. It just all worked well, and it was like a little well-oiled watch, as one of our members used to describe the whole event as.
Yeah. So what sort of things do you look for when you're finding that perfect venue?
Ooh, crikey. I tend to trust a lot of my hospitality experience to gut instinct. from the moment I came to Cranage Hall, I had a gut instinct. Here were people who were committed to quality. They wanted us to have a good time. It wasn't just about selling us rooms and a big dining room for the dinner. It was about putting on a show that not only illustrated and demonstrated the quality of their customer service and their excellent facilities. It was also about a commitment to make sure that everything went right, and they helped you make it go right.
Yeah. And what was their reaction when you asked to put the cars in the dining hall?
There were a couple of sharp intakes of breath, but you know, it was a few seconds, and if you need to do it, do it.
Yeah.
You know, it was one of those things where they trusted that we weren't going to wreck the place. They trusted that we would be sensible about it all, and we did it. And again, all the members rallied round. Unfortunately, just at the moment we were going to put the cars in the dining room, the rain came down.
Oh.
So all the cars had to be hand dried and prepared to go in there. But within minutes, we must have had a dozen people rallying round with chamois leathers and dusters and taping up bits of polythene onto the floor so the cars could be wheeled in. And within, I don't even think, half an hour, we transformed the dining room into what Billy Roots would probably have proudly shown off at the Albert Hall when he launched one of his new cars there.
Yeah.
And I've always felt, and it's probably been a benchmark, a part of my national weekends, I like to have cars in the dining room when we have the dinner. And it makes a really impressive backdrop to the whole event. But it also brings them in to share the dinner with us.
Yeah, because the cars are what has brought everyone together
Absolutely,
in the first
yeah.
place. So.
And of course this year sadly last year we lost an amazing clubman, Martin Ray, bless him. He'd been our secretary for over 4 decades and had done an immense amount of work for our club. So over the weekend we had his former car here, which he restored with immense pride with his wife. We had our new secretary's car here, and we also had the oldest Singer car here, which was 105 years old. So we decided that we would have the old secretary's car, the new secretary's car, and the oldest car all together in the dining room as our theme. And I think somehow that brought not only the memories and the spirit of our lost colleague to us, but actually also forged our commitment for the new era that's taking over in the club. And also a nod to our history. 105 years, that's an amazing period of time.
Yeah.
To think that a car, and it was driving around under its own power yesterday. You know, I think it was a remarkable tribute to Singer and to some of the special people in our club.
Yeah, absolutely. And the group that we had of non-singers were the ones that were in charge of judging the Masters class. Yeah. And what I thought was really nice was that Martin Ray's car won the Masters class, judged by a group of people that had never met him, didn't know anything about like his history with it, but on its own the car had stood out as a truly exceptional car. Yeah. And that was really nice.
It was nice that they were young people, but you could tell, and I think sometimes young people get a bad press in this modern day world. You know, there are so many amazing young people. It's only a very small minority who let everyone down. Yesterday we had a representative sample of, I think, the very best of the future of our classic car world. You know, they were enthusiastic, they were really having a really good time.
They were taking the judging really seriously.
And that just, you know, typifies that there is hope for our future. I think I really came away from yesterday not only elated that those young people had a great time, but actually really reassured that I think we've got a good, strong future if we can just continue to nurture that enthusiasm and give them the opportunity to grow and thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for sitting down and having a
Pleasure.
chat with me and sharing some of your stories.
I finally got in the back seat.
Yeah, how is the back seat?
It's the first time I've ever sat in the back seat of my Singer Vogue. It was very comfortable.
Well, that's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you very much, and I hope you have a restful week after everything.
Thanks, Becca.
Yeah, thank you. So that was really special. It was fantastic to talk to Nigel and hear a little bit more, especially about the collection of Nellie. Nellie is such a special car in my life. She was a car that has been around, again, almost as long as me in the family, because she was bought as a 4-seater when I was born. So that was fantastic to kind of hear his part of her history and have that kind of recorded, but also to hear his passion for all things Singer and about keeping the Singer mark going and people interested in it. His car yesterday was a huge hit with the young members and with the Women Drivers Social Club people who were here, and I hope that more clubs start to get involved in this idea of encouraging young people behind the wheel, not just in the cars, of some of these pre-war things, to get them wanting to be part of the heritage and restoration and continuing work on some of these vehicles. But yeah, an absolutely fantastic chat, and I hope you enjoyed it too. In the meantime, I'm going to have to drag myself out of this beautiful car, so drive safely and happy motoring.